watched me in the last one, so this one you get the disembodied voice. Anyway, one thing I talked about was developing what I call an architect's discipline in order to look at things in different layers. And so, do you understand what actually lies next? That a window sits in a steeple, which sits on top of a building, which sits in a neighborhood. So can you look at something at multiple levels at the same time? Because that's the way you make a good business work. Now, two people can have totally valid ideas, but the question is how do you exercise it? So in terms of strategy, how do you zoom out deeper? And those are the guys who typically will win. Ken Olsen was CEO of the Digital Equipment Corporation. Ken Olsen once had the second biggest computer firm in the world behind IBM. And he believed that nobody wants a computer in their home. So he never understood the meaning of the PC or anything else. Steve Jobs was exactly the opposite. His vision was, I'm going to put a computer in everyone's home. So what did people do? Well, you designed your computer, you assembled it, you sold your product, and you know who you were selling to. That the computer was a device for geeks and mathematicians and scientists. And this is what Jobs saw. What he realized is the barrier in order to get technology into your home is, can I make it friendly to you? One thing you have to say about Apple products, they are by far the friendliest of all of the electronic products out there. And it's because that's what Jobs understood. In order to make a good product, I have to embrace it personally. And so subsequently, Apple products have always been very simple. Remember the commercials where they put it on a timer and showed that you can have your entire computer set up within 5 minutes? And also, what did he do? He made it cool to have an Apple computer. And so a lot of it is about emotion. And that leads to a tsunami of cash. And subsequently, Ken Olsen's company got eaten up by Compaq, and all shreds of deck are gone today. When you think about your corporation, yes, you have all those functions, but what it really comes down to, and especially if you're a startup, it's about your strategy, how you're going to marshal your resources to pull it off. It's about marketing, how you're going to sell, and your product development. So when you need to think about a corporation, think about these three things. And also, the same thing goes for startups. Now, we talked about what do you focus on to be excellent as a company, whether it's segmentation, cost leadership, or differentiation. But what it comes down to is, what do I excel at? And what that translates to is either the best price, the best product, or I know the customer better than anyone else in terms of customer intimacy. And so price is actually today the hardest value to sell, because if all you're selling is price and you have something new and innovative, people are going to sit and wait. Building the best product, this is very common for engineers, and this is where a lot of innovators enter the space. And then customer intimacy. Now that we have all this digital technology and I understand you and I can get closer to you, it becomes a much bigger issue. And you can compete on more than one. Now, an integrative strategy is what comes down to when we're talking about mission and vision and your goals. Essentially, every piece of your activity needs to support what that vision and goal is. And Walmart and Southwest are good examples of that. And it's this which makes you excel. Now, let's do a little exercise. Bill Gates, what is he about? Well, best product, right? Because they sure as heck aren't about best price. Steve Jobs and Apple. Well, more than one thing, right? He's competing on product, and he's also competing on customer intimacy. And that's that he wants to make an emotional tie to you. Subsequently, because that increases his brand value, he doesn't have to compete on price. Richard Branson and Virgin, pretty much the same thing. They had the fastest turnaround and everything else. Elon Musk, No, he's all about the product, right? Best product out there. Sold price at Costco goes without saying. It's all about price. Now, we talked about Tom Peters, and Tom Peters believes that it's all about the customer, and so the marketing is about the customer. On the other hand, a lot of people view marketing as hand-to-hand combat, and so this reflects on your business. What are you about? Are you about just making a customer happy, or is it about the overall combat that you're fighting? And a big part of that combat is the landscape. And your landscape is defined by these 5 factors. In order to compete, you have to address these. One is the kind of market you go into. They're either static, they're dynamic, or you can create a disruption. And static means it's not moving very quickly, like machine shops. Dynamic, a lot of people are in there, it's changing rapidly. That's like social media. And disruption is where I can disrupt the market and reinvigorate it. Now, this is the most important thing to remember about competition. Competition is taken from the viewpoint of the customer. Too often corporations think my competition are people who do the same thing I do. No, your competition is much broader stroked. That's why a lot of companies get killed by people they never saw coming. It can take place at different levels. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the end of your integration. And trying to figure out and forecast what is it that they're going to do. Direct competitors, those are the enterprises and competitors in general, I should say. They're buying with you over the same customer values that you have. How do they touch them, and how do they interact with them? And so how do I do this? Well, one, I can make something called a perceptual map, and that's I just make a map somehow, or graph, where I am versus where the customer is based on certain values. And so here's an example of making a burger chain where you can order your chain. As it turns out, all of the companies have these now. But you get the idea of looking at different fast food burger chains and how quickly you can get it versus price. Here's an example of mapping out all the competitors that you have on a table and seeing how they all compare versus different parameters. So the process is, in order to do this analysis, is pick the values, divide it into quadrants, populate it with the competitors, pick my space, show how I'm unique, and go fight. And so you can make it, another tool you can use are bullseye diagrams, and that's it. Who are my major players in the middle? I mean at the center. Who are the minor players, and who are the potential players? And so I won't go into prisoner's dilemma. It's about competition response because it's going to take a little more time. And I think most of you are in my data-driven decision-making class, so we cover it there anyway. So finally, when you figure out who your competition is, you can map them out. And these are the things you look at when you map out your competitor profiles. And so these are the factors that you're going to study and look at. You can also use value chain analysis, and you can mine for information. And that's it. Annual reports are great. Annual reports tell you everything. So competitive analysis can be signed up by these things, and that's what you could do. 5 C's. You could do strategic landscape maps, and well, you know how I feel about SWOT, but it's still a technique that people use. Buyer power is when purchasing groups actually dominate how people buy things. And here are some examples. ARP, mutual funds. These are all examples of buyer power. When people get together, you all of a sudden have amazing strength to go negotiate deals because you're not one person, you're many people. And so that's the advantage of it. The disadvantage of it is, are they always meeting your needs of the group? Supplier power is exactly the opposite, where if there's a limited supply of something, then all the suppliers get together to try to dominate the market and how it's sold. An example is OPEC. American Hospital Supply is the biggest hospital supply company. They basically took all the little ones and banded it together to make it easier for hospitals to order goods. The problem is they have a monopoly. Substitution is basically a product can do the same thing that for the function that you want. The key for you is you have to be better than what they're currently doing, and it tends to be really overlooked. And that's that you could talk about, really cool technology like VR or something like that. But the point is, it's like, I'm fine just playing with my Nintendo or something like that. I don't really need it. And so you have to be careful about tunnel vision sinking in. Some examples of substitution are eyeglasses versus LASIK, angioplasty versus open heart surgery, and satellite versus cable TV. Just because you have one, you can find another way to fix it than what you typically think. Lock-in means that I prevent my customers from going somewhere else. In medical devices lock-in, you sign contracts. Software, what lock-in is, and it also acts as lockout, is education. It takes time to learn how to use software, and so that becomes a factor. And here are some examples of lock-in. I think you can pretty much understand what it's talking about. And lockout keeps competitors out. So contracts work both ways. Patents are a way to lock other people out. Scale. Walmart, originally what their strategy was to move into population centers with 50,000 to 100,000 people. Why? Because those areas could only support one Walmart. And so that was their form of their lockout. They got into that market first, and then you couldn't. You could do it by design. What Intel did is not only are they the number one processor company in the world, they're also the number one motherboard maker. And AMD was coming out with a good chip, so what they did is change the pinout. And that made AMD have to go somewhere else. Some other kinds of ways to think about the generic strategies is, do you go head to head? Do you encircle them? Meaning, do you compete in the areas around a business? Do you avoid them altogether? Do you concentrate on one segment? Or do you use hit and run tactics? These are the generic strategies that companies use. In terms of the entrepreneurs, you're the people who don't have a lot of resources. So you have to focus on market segments, things that you can beat the incumbents at. Technology changes all the rules, and theory says you can compete in one place, but digital tells you something else. Now, is all this marketing theory breaking down because of all the new technology? In some cases it is, in some cases it isn't. You have to be able to look at it. Like, for example, first mover is breaking down. And it's because all the advantages of first mover have pretty much gone away. Doesn't mean you should not be first mover, but it means you have to be leery and careful. And so what drives our world today is globalization, digital technology, and micro devices, and digital technology, and all of it puts together IoT. The other marketing end you look at today is the richness of an experience, meaning how personal is it, versus reach. How many people can I touch? And so we get reach through the cloud and richness through personalization. Now, before we used to think that first movers had a huge advantage because they've been through the learning curve and everything else. But globalization, you can find anything anywhere. The web gives us all the information we need. Even quality, all the techniques are well known. It doesn't take that long to get up to quality. And also, as we see, the learning curve isn't what it once was. And so the question is do we still have brand loyalty? The world is driven by millennials, and their purchasing habits are much different than what people are traditionally long to. And so I'll wrap up with this, and this is an example of a landscape, and as you can see, I'll go through the 5 C's as well as lock in, lock out, buyer and supplier power. But the strength of Nick Woodman is he actually didn't want to make GoPro. He wanted to sell it to Kodak, and they said no. But he believed enough in this product. But the big issue with Nick Woodman, is that he understood the extreme sports stars. Those are the ones who created GoPro. And by being able to market to them, by understanding their needs, that's what made his company a great success.